Hey, AP folks, this is a video to help you understand one of the most important concepts and ask that question, right there. What is rhetoric? This is one of the most important words. You'll soon find out why it's important for our course. We've got some key terms that I hope that you pay attention to and jot down. And we'll just launch right into this. This is truly the foundation of English language and composition, which is the course that you find yourself in. So I did want to just ask that question. It's important to not skim over and what's in the course name. So we've got like English, right? It's an English class, language and composition. So this is truly like the study of language. And it's not necessarily about literature, although we definitely, we read novels, we read plays and stuff like that. That's literature. But this is a language course. And composition, right? To compose something is to write something. Composition is like, writing. Okay, so this is a language and writing course at its core. And there are many, many other parts of the course. When we do speaking and listening skills, where obviously, the AP test itself has a lot of close reading, so it's a reading course as well in terms of close reading. And then there's also things like write novels that we read and study together. And so we do a lot of literary analysis. But all of the emphases, it's a regular English course, but all of the emphases boil down to language and composition, which, like, here's the name, or here's that term, boil down to rhetoric, okay, and the study of rhetoric. So, language and composition, that is certainly helpful on its surface in terms of we're doing normal English work, but what are we emphasizing in that English work? And then the fancy pants, more academic way to talk about that is this term rhetoric. Okay, maybe you've seen that word rhetoric, maybe you understand it fully, or you've used it like with a rhetorical question or something like that. Uh, but rhetoric is really what we're talking about when we mean the study of language. And this is, I mean, at its core, AP Lang and Comp, this is a rhetorical studies course. It's not a formal rhetorical studies course. That's a little bit different, where you might catch on to what that might mean as you do some readings here. But what is rhetoric, and could you even define it? It is all about language. It's all about the language, and it's all about studying the language. And I'm going to kind of unpack it. It's hard, right? This guy Gideon Burton has an amazing resource that we'll use online here and there throughout the course. But all he says, it's the study of effective speaking and writing, and the art of persuasion, and many other things. Like, it's hard to define this term, this rhetoric. Did I spell that right? I don't even know. Rhetoric. It's hard to define. It can be abstract and sort of nebulous. Um, but essentially, it's the art of speaking or writing, and we're going to analyze that. And I don't know. Maybe I'm going to give an example here of what a rhetorical analysis or studying rhetoric might mean. Uh, Putting it in layman's terms, it's the what versus the how. Again, this is not an example, but I'm kind of hoping that we can take these abstract ideas and put them in a different way so that maybe one of these times it'll click and you'll be like, I get a sense for what rhetoric is. Finally. Okay. Um, okay. You have, from time immemorial in your classes, in your English works, in your communications classes, whatever, you have learned to decode words. Hopefully, pretty early in elementary school, you learn to decode words, like with phonics and stuff. And I recognize that this collection of letters and creates these sounds, and I can tell what this sentence is saying. And the advanced version of that sort of evolves into reading comprehension. Like, I understand what the author's saying. I could summarize this chapter of the book. I know what happens to Pony Boy and the Outsiders after this event or something like that. You've typically looked at any written work, and it doesn't have to be English. It can be in science or in history or something like that. Now, can you understand what was said? Can you understand the content of that? And so we're still very interested in the content, but come on, you're juniors, you can add another layer, and you're doing this anyway. Anytime you're a critical reader, anytime you're reading between the lines, like, you're already doing rhetorical studies. But this is like, I want to make explicit this little tilt, right? We're looking at a written work from a little different angle, not just what the author is saying, but how the author's saying it. So yes, you could write a beautiful summary of that complicated chapter of a novel, or of this history of how Galileo changed the paradigm of scientific inquiry or something, because you read it in a good textbook or a good article online or whatever the case may be. You can understand what the author's saying. Comprehension is still essential. But we want to go a step further. And with the rhetorical analysis, we're asking ourselves, okay, how is that author presenting the information? Or how is the author saying whatever the content has been said? So, not just what, but how. And perhaps as we work through many examples over the course of this semester, again, that light bulb will come on and you'll be like, oh, that's rhetoric. But the what versus the how, that little slight change in how we approach things is helpful, maybe, in your understanding of what is Mac talking about when he says rhetoric, right? Okay, so rhetoric is all around you. Oops. And the world is full of rhetorical situations. And any rhetorical situation is just anything where language comes into play. Okay, so um, it's easy in a classroom to talk about like a big speech as a rhetorical situation. Do you remember Julius Caesar and Caesar's funeral with Brutus? Sways the crowd, and that's a very formally it's easy to formally analyze that as a rhetorical situation. And then, no, wait, Mark Antony, he actually brings out the bleeding body and all that stuff, and he sways the crowd even more. So, like a speech would be a very clearly understood rhetorical situation. The Gettysburg Address, or George Washington's farewell address, or these famous presidential addresses, or Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, these famous speeches, very clear rhetorical situations. But like you can also think about the language that's coming between two parties in everyday speech or any type of discussion. It doesn't have to be something that's like debated in the halls of Congress to be easily analyzed as a rhetorical situation. So if you and a parent, say your mom and you last weekend were debating your interpretation of what violates curfew or something like that, and it doesn't even have to be like oppositional debate. Anytime that communication is happening, we have a rhetorical situation. You're reading a cereal box, think about the health claims in a cereal box or something like that. Those are, when you're reading that while you're chomping down whatever, that's a rhetorical situation as well. So language is all around us. That means rhetorical situations are all around us. I don't know. It could be like when the CEO of Tesla, right, tweets something. That's a rhetorical situation. Social media is just like layer upon layer of rhetorical situations, right, for rhetorical analysis. So rhetoric is really everywhere. And anywhere there's interaction between human beings or communication, you have rhetoric. And that doesn't mean that, like, obviously there's content, there's ideas being exchanged. That's what language does, right? We've got these symbols or signifiers, if you will, of different ideas, which are words. You've got some on the screen up here, right? Those are symbols, and that's in the content and the information. But if we were to do a rhetorical analysis and kind of put on our how vision, right, we're actually analyzing the rhetoric, we would look at not just the what, but the how, all that stuff. So, yeah, anywhere there's communication, I should say, there's the potential for us to analyze the rhetoric. Sometimes, like in physics, especially, or math or something, you get a really good teacher, you get in the upper level classes, and you realize that physics is not just, bowling balls going down triangular shaped ramps. And you see that, physics is inherent in the speech or the sound waves coming out of your laptop right now, and interacting with something going on in your ears and then into your neurons, and physics is the storm that's rolling through, or the convection currents of the cloud formation that you gaze out your window and see, and a good physics teacher will teach you, holy smokes, at the atomic level, subatomic level, at the level of the universe, physics is everything, physics is everywhere, physics is everywhere. Well, like rhetoric is the same way. It's easy in a classroom to just pick apart the speeches and stuff like that, but rhetoric is everywhere. Rhetorical situations are everywhere. Let me give you a way to visualize a rhetorical situation called the rhetorical triangle. I'm actually going to ask you to do this a few times, but just like I'm going to take, a presidential speech or something. Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, 4 score and 7 years ago, something like that. Okay. And you have a whole mess of things besides just the words on the page. I could hand you a textbook and say, we're going to look at the Gettysburg Address, and you're going to see the text on a page. And you have done that in other English classes and other types of classes as well. And you've been doing perhaps levels of rhetorical analysis, but we want to look at a rhetorical situation much more broadly than just the words on the page, okay? And when you say rhetorical situation, we're not just talking about the words on the page, so to speak. We're talking about the whole picture and the parties involved. And so this triangle helps us visualize that. It's just a graphic organizer. It's not complete, or it doesn't capture everything. But think about the message at the very tippity top of the rhetorical triangle is simply that, the words on the page that I already said. So we've been working with that in other classes. We know what the words of the page are, but there's so much more going on in a rhetorical situation. We have a speaker who's a flesh and blood person, whether it's Lincoln or whether it's your mom or whoever. The speaker has perhaps his own collection of cultural baggage or ideas or beliefs that are going to influence his or her word choice, and even like the pacing and the rate of delivery and all those sorts of things that you have to understand, that you may not get if it's just black and white words on the page. I'm just looking at the text of the speech. You've got the audience on the lower left hand side, and the audience has a complex relationship with the speaker. The audience may not always be totally apparent. And if a senator is shaking his fist at the president of the United States, a senator might issue a statement or just tweet or something like that, or create an open letter, draft an open letter to the president, and they're raging about something. Is that audience really the president of the United States, or is that the electorate back home in whatever state the senator's from, or his the party faithful or something like that? So the audience could be different things. It could be, many different things, and that's really important. It's beyond just the black and white text, words on the page, right? But it's an important part of the rhetorical situation. And then we've got this everything outside the oval there. You can just see it in the upper left-hand corner, but it's really everything outside the oval is the context. What's if I just threw out things like what is the date of the Gettysburg Address, and what's going on in the course of the Civil War at that time, and what has just happened, and where are they? Right, they're actually at Gettysburg. And who is there? I guess that's the audience, but blah blah blah. Lots of contextual information that can influence how the message is going to be received if you want a full scope understanding of the rhetorical situation. And what's going on with that triangle in the very middle? That's the exigence. That's a word you may or may not have ever heard before. Probably not. Maybe you have, but the exigence, I'll talk about that a little bit further on the next slide, but that's the purpose for writing in the first place, kind of the why, the big question mark. Why is this rhetorical situation happening in the first place? This speech, the Gettysburg Address, for instance. And that's the trickiest thing to really wrap your head around, because it's not the same as the message, the words on the page. In fact, sometimes the words on the page, the words that come out of the speaker's mouth or the author's, pen, so to speak, or whatever, they may have a hidden agenda, and they might say they're writing for some reason, but really, you read between the lines, they're actually saying fill in the blank. They've got a real purpose that may not necessarily be as explicit as you once thought. Sometimes it's super clear, right? But all these parts of the triangle, and this is where your analysis would come in. You could write essay page after essay page after essay page if you really dig into the weeds of this triangle. The audience has a complicated relationship with the speaker, and whether they're friendly terms or whether they're from the same, background, or whether they are even like in the same room versus a WebEx, for instance, or they're on the other side of the globe, or something like where the audience is in relationship to the speaker. All that matters. Whether they will be a hostile audience or a friendly audience. And Those things also influence the message, right? We've got this, the arrows are working both ways. I'm just telling you, there's all sorts of complicated relationships that it's up to you as a good analyzer of rhetoric to tease out and to think through. So if it's a doctor who's speaking about something, addressing the nation, or just addressing another handful of doctors in the same room, like the message might have different word choice. Because if a doctor's speaking to other doctors, he can just, use the medical jargon, and maybe he'll crack a joke or two that only doctors would get. But if the doctor is addressing the nation, or a patient for that matter, they're going to put things in layman's terms. And probably the message is going to look a little bit different depending on those complicated relationships. So there's a whole swirl of different things that go into a rhetorical situation. And over the course of our studies, we are going to, be in charge of paying attention to the bigger picture, not just the words on the page, but reading between the lines and being good, you know, rhetorical analysts or analyzers, I guess I said earlier. I don't, whatever. It's great. Uh, so exigence, that's that key, that's the why, the existential why question mark. The exigence is a fancy pants academic phrase to talk about author's purpose, essentially. So what actually sparked that rhetorical situation, or that rhetorical event, I should say? What sparked the speaker to speak or the author to write? We're talking speakers and writers, interchangeably here in the study of rhetoric. We're usually going to talk about text because we're writing, we're reading somebody who's written something down in our course of studies. But speaker is also sometimes a very useful tool. Speaker, listener, author, reader, it's all the same. You know what I mean? So to understand the exigence, these are some key questions. So, it could be from the outside, or it could have, did something happen that sparked the need for communication or that rhetorical event? Could also be like concerning author's motive. Is there an opinion or something about the world? I know you can't read that. Is there an opinion or something about the world that the author is trying to change? So maybe the author wants to change something, and that would be the exigence, be or the hidden agenda, or the very clear explicit agenda. And it's quite simply, put another way, that third bullet point, which you may or may not be able to see, is what the heck is the author's purpose? Okay, so that's exigence. And all these are pretty much your foundational key terms when it comes to studying rhetoric. I've tried my hardest to kind of do a flyover of like several different lessons that are important throughout the year. But the key takeaway here is that, like, this is language and composition, is it's a rhetorical studies course, bottom line. And you need to kind of have an understanding, even if it's not perfect. You need to have an understanding of what rhetoric is, and what does it mean to do a rhetorical analysis, which is where you're really paying attention to the how of how an author is writing something, or how a speaker is saying something. Um, so, just to wrap up, how would you wrap language around the following ideas? Anybody can parrot back a definition, but we're going to try to understand these things. So, as you go through these ideas here, I'm not saying that you're mastering them. You just watched this maybe painfully long video. Um, and this is just an introduction to these things. But how would you wrap language around the idea of rhetoric? How would you say it in your own words? How would you describe the difference between what and how in terms of how to analyze a text or how to listen to something? Again, it's probably something you've been doing for a long time as someone who's, you got to discern what's going on in all of the messages and rhetorical events of your daily life. From what's going on in your phone to how you're interacting with a teacher on a WebEx to how you're, you got a message from your boss at work to you got to, figure something out with mom about tomorrow's schedule. So all those things, the what versus the how would you analyze those things? Or do you understand the difference between the what versus the how? And then do you understand what a rhetorical situation is and all the factors that make up a rhetorical situation? That's complicated. Took me this long old video, and I've only been pretty vague and just trying my best to cobble together this, and I'm supposed to be the expert. So but it's worth a try. Think it through. How would you explain what a rhetorical situation is to somebody who hasn't seen this or isn't in our class? And then lastly, what's that word exigence mean? Because it is pretty important. And the shorthand is author's purpose, but could you put it in different words even? Maybe make that force you to think that through a little bit. So there's the article that is linked right here, and it's also on that the Rhetorical Forest. It's a uh, great resource, and you're going to be reading that shortly. It's more of an academic, formal version of what I just ran through. I hope this helps, and I hope that you make some steps to make this less abstract and more concrete in your brains. That's all. Thanks for watching.